we have a little bit housekeeping, like very quickly, is that we want to kind of remind everyone that this session is being recorded and broadcasting live on YouTube. And also there will be a quick survey after the webinar to know a little bit more about how the experience of this webinar went. So if all the participants, you could kindly fill that out, that would be really helpful for us. And back to you, Grace.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, good day, and good evening, distinguished participants. My name is Grace Halla, and I'm the Mercury lead in the Jeff Chemicals and Waste Unit at the United Nations Environment Program. A very welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to join the online COP5 side event today on navigating the uncharged waters towards mercury-free small island developing states, exploring mercury uses and human exposure trends in SIDS. This event is co-organized by UNEP and the Biodiversity Research Institute, seeking to highlight the current mercury usage patterns in SIDS and how practices contribute to environmental contamination and human exposure. In addition, we will discuss and explore the consequences of mercury exposure on the health of local populations and fragile ecosystems of SIDS, and also describe ongoing efforts, projects, and success stories that showcase effective strategies for reducing mercury use and mitigation measures in SIDS. Finally, the event will bring forward the importance of international cooperation, policy implementation, and capacity building to collaboratively move towards a mercury-free future in the SIDS. And we have invited and organized a very distinguished panel of leaders and experts. So without any further delay, I would like to hand the floor over to our moderator today, Ms. Talia Al-Shah of Biodiversity Research Institute. The floor is now yours, Talia.
Sorry, you might have to unmute yourself. Could you please unmute yourself so that we can hear you? Thank you.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button, but yes. Pleasant good day to everyone. And so as Grace mentioned, my name is Talia Alisha. I'm the International Environmental Specialist at Biodiversity Research Institute. And today we will be talking about navigating the uncharted waters towards mercury-free SIDS. And as Grace mentioned, small island developing states, or SIDS, span across the globe from the Caribbean region to the Pacific, to the Indian, Atlantic, and South China Seas. And while they are make up a very small percentage of the total population and landmass, they have a lot of unique challenges with socioeconomic and environmental aspects. And with that comes some unique approaches to managing these issues. So today we have representatives from two of the SIDS regions, the Caribbean region and the Pacific region. And I'll go into a bit more of background on the presenters as we get into their presentations later on. But first, I'd like to welcome Dr. David Evers to present on the global trends, or the trends observed throughout SIDS overall on mercury releases and mercury in biota as well. Sorry, next slide. How do I go to the next slide? Yes. So with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Evers.
Great. Thank you very much, Talia. It's good to be here with everyone. And I have had some experience now with working with the Minamata initial assessments around the world. I've been fortunate enough to work with many different countries and many different groups. And I think this provides an opportunity to compare the results and the findings from the MIAs. And then at the same time, our group worked with each of the countries, or many of the countries, to examine how mercury moves through the environment and actually gets bound up into biota, and some of those biota that are human health or eco-health sort of interests. Next slide. So on the next slide,
I seem to be having some technical issues with sharing this. Yes. Okay.
there, great. So it's something that we all are very familiar with, is that mercury varies around the world. It varies according to different source types. And here are four major source types, from industrial to ESGM to mercury added products. And when we look at the world, mercury is basically virtually everywhere. If we looked at the world 1,000 years ago, mercury would be everywhere. But our activities, human society's activities, are redistributing that mercury around the world. And there are places that there are hotspots that are being created by our activities and the activities and our indirect activities through climate change. Next slide. Great. Thanks, Talia. So there's a lot more information known now because of the Minamata initial assessments. Just think of all those inventories that have been conducted in a standardized way around the world in 120 different developing countries and countries and economies in transition. And a lot of developed countries also have mercury emissions data as well. So there's a lot more that is known because of the Minamata Convention, the efforts behind that. A lot more is known about how much mercury is being emitted or released into the environment. And because of that information, we can also look at the source types of mercury. The primary source type, as you can see right here, is primary metal production or artisanal small-scale gold mining in orange. Yellow is consumer products. You can see that's another major source of mercury around the world. And then in blue, there is waste deposition, also just basically related to consumer products. So that's how the mercury makeup is around the world, and looking at that through a SIDS lens. Next slide. So looking at it through the small island developing states lens and how that compares with other countries around the world for emissions and releases. We can look at this from a per capita standpoint or just a strict emissions and releases. And this represents about 150 countries or so. It's the small island developing states countries, not all of them, and then many other countries that are non-SIDS. And it's what you would think. The SIDS countries tend to be smaller countries, so I would expect the annual emissions and releases are less than many other countries. Per capita, that's not quite the same, but you can see the trends at least. And there's some countries, some small island developing states per capita that do exceed other countries that are non-SIDS around the world. So this is an interesting way that we can start using the standardized MIA data, the Minamata initial assessment data, and how do those data compare around the world. Next. I'm going to focus more on the three regions, and really it'll just be a focus, I think. In the end, I'd like to look at the Caribbean region and the Pacific, the Oceania region, with some other slides. For this one, just looking at annual emissions releases in Latin America and Caribbean, we realize some of the small island developing states do include mainland countries like Belize and Guyana. Sub-Saharan Africa includes some island countries such as Cabo Verde and Sao Tome, and then East Asian and Pacific are more of the Oceania island countries. Next slide. So this is how they compare. And looking at each of these countries, these are the countries that we pulled out the mercury data from the MIA inventories. This represents, I think, around 26 small island developing states. Just a quick glance, you can see, for example, the countries that stand out are Guyana and Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. And those are countries that are showing more in their MIA inventories. They're not just consumer products or waste deposition, which are the yellows and blues. So there's a quick visual, but you see more of the oranges and reds in those countries, and they represent because Guyana and Jamaica, or Guyana has more of the primary metal production, so does Jamaica, and then Trinidad and Tobago is more of the fuel energies or oil and gas energy sources. But this is another way. I'm not going to lean on this too much, and this sort of information is available through a UNEP website on a dashboard that does showcase the mercury inventories, and anybody can look at that database through the dashboard and look at the same sort of information and get a better feeling for how does your country compare with other countries. Next. Just more information on the estimated annual emissions and releases by kilograms of mercury per year for the different countries. Countries like Guyana, which has an ASGM active energies or mercury source, showcases highly here. Other countries such as Dominican Republic, Comoros, Trinidad, Tobago, Jamaica are also more elevated than a lot of the other small island developing states in their mercury inventories. So generally, mercury inventories are much lower, and it would be expected in a lot of the small island developing states. Next. So in the small island developing states, most of the mercury that is available within the country is except for those few examples such as Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. Most of that mercury is bound up in consumer products. So light bulbs, batteries, there's relay switches, dental amalgams. It's those sort of consumer products or amalgams that are within these islands. And so looking at how that relates from sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and East Asia and Pacific, the Oceania countries, this is a way to kind of get an idea of how they relate with one another. Next. And then looking across in all those three regions, looking at the countries themselves. Again, this is how the mercury adds up in consumer products in those different countries. Again, this is just a snapshot of these countries. You can look at this with a much greater sort of detail within the UNEP dashboard on the MIA inventories. Next. And then I just wanted to touch base on the mercury that enters the system. How much mercury enters the system is really important to know, and that's what the MIAs provide us. But also what is very good to understand is how that mercury can be converted into methylmercury. So that elemental inorganic mercury does create a risk, but the risk is even higher from a human health dietary standpoint if that mercury is methylated at a high level. So there's what we've kind of looked at a model. If you can think of a model of a threat model, and that threat equals the sensitivity of the system to mercury input, and that mercury input is related to risk. And the sensitivity is related to how the bacteria can methylate the mercury that comes into the system, and those bacteria do best in wetland areas, anaerobic systems with high dissolved organic carbon and low pH, etc. So there can be models that can be created to better understand the sensitivity. You can add on to the risk, which is the sources of mercury, and that provides more of a threat, which is really the way we need to examine this globally. Next. When we look at this globally, we think we can leap forward from that sensitivity analysis and leap all the way forward to some of the highest trophic level species or organisms that are found around the world. That sort of relationship is something that I'm going to skip through and just jump to, here are the mercury exposure levels based on a very large database, and this database represents over 10,000 samples from tuna from around the world, and the GBIMS database is based on over 1,600 peer-reviewed manuscripts. So from a tuna standpoint, a lot is known, and these are the tuna that aren't found in the tuna can, but these are actually tuna, the individual fish that are actually sampled. And these are very large sample sizes for most of the different tuna species. This represents 7 to 9 tuna species here. The highest tuna are the ones that are longer lived and the largest, such as bluefin tuna. And then the smaller, the lower mercury concentrations are in the smaller and shorter lived species of tuna, which are the skipjack, yellowfin. And the skipjack and yellowfin are the species that are most commonly used for the tuna cans, as well as albacore. The lines that you see here, the total mercury concentrations on the x-axis, those lines represent different thresholds that the US EPA and the FDA have identified as how much mercury can relate to weekly allotments of consumption. I won't get into that, but there's a lot known about mercury in tuna and a lot known about mercury, how much mercury is too much from a human health standpoint. The dark bars here are the FAO harvests. So the good news is that the highest FAO harvests are for the tuna species that have the lowest mercury concentrations. Next. Same can be looked at for swordfish. A lot of data are known for swordfish. Swordfish tend to be on the upper level because they're long-lived, high trophic level species. Most of the average mercury concentrations tend to be over 0.46 parts per million, which is what the US EPA and FDA use. And you could start to see when we look at mercury globally through these different SIDS countries that have provided information as well as the peer-reviewed literature, that there's a difference in the variation in how much mercury is in the large ocean basins. Even though these are individuals and species that have very large home ranges and widely move around, there still are some ocean basin differences that can be detected. Next. There's been a lot of effort to how to standardize across the different countries, the small island developing states, from the Oceania to the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. And 4 species have come about that could be used as standardized way for comparing across these large areas. And barracuda, mahi-mahi, yellowfin tuna, and red snappers are the 4 species that we've kind of landed on. And this is a good graph to compare the South Pacific versus the Caribbean. And this is interesting where different ocean basins, and again, this is based on fish that have been sampled in these different countries, the SIDS countries, have been provided through this sort of effort. We can see that barracudas in the South Pacific tend to be higher than the barracudas in the Caribbean region. The same for mahi-mahi. Mahi-mahi tends to be very safe for human health consumption in the Caribbean, and across the South Pacific, more information is needed. Next. So in the end, with the information that we receive from the different SIDS countries on the fish that they sampled, we can place those fish in a matrix that looks at it's a trade-off of the benefits and costs of eating fish. The benefits are a protein benefit, but also the omega-3s there in those fish. And the omega-3s, if you look at this matrix on the upper right, the omega-3s are the higher they are, the healthier choices they are. And if we look on the upper right, that ends up being the lower mercury levels. So the healthier choices are higher omega-3s, low mercury. Then if we contrasting that, if we look at the lower left, the omega-3s are low and mercury levels increase from top to bottom. So those species that are in the orange and red tend to be riskier choices. So we could start to put this matrix together for different countries, for different ocean basins, and have those different fish species integrated within these different cells, because it isn't a either or decision making. It's more of a gradient, and that gradient includes healthier gradients for riskier gradients. Next slide. So more information that can be provided by each of these countries around the world, and these island countries, another group of organisms that can be examined to provide more information on not just human health, actually, and it's human health as using birds as indicators, but also eco-health. And seabirds, longer-lived, higher trophic level seabirds like albatrosses, tend to have the highest mercury concentrations, and they are being used by many different countries as another way to indicate how much mercury is in the fish that people eat and how much mercury is in the fish that these organisms eat as well from an eco-health standpoint. Next slide. This is my last slide. Just to examine the database that we put together based on mercury in hair samples from countries from around the world. A lot of these countries represent small island developing states. And what we found in the end, it's not surprising that the small island developing states tend to have higher mercury concentrations in the hair samples in their countries versus other mainland countries like North America, South America, and Central America. So Oceania had 79% of the people that we looked at mercury in their hair And most of the mercury in the hair samples is methylmercury, and it represents dietary uptake. And 1 part per million is a general rule of thumb threshold. There's many different thresholds that could be used, but this is a good way of comparing the exposure of mercury in people from a dietary standpoint around the world. So that's all I have today. Happy to answer any questions at the end of this the webinar. Thanks, Talia.
All right, thanks so much, David, for that presentation. And it's really important for us to understand the issue within SIDS by understanding how it compares to the research that's been conducted across the globe as well. So having that comparison is really great and useful in implementing the different measures we need to manage it adequately. So next we'll go right into the other aspect of this session today, which is that we're going to have presenters from the Pacific region and the Caribbean region as well to talk a little bit more on the SIDS within their regions, on the actions and trends on mercury management within the SIDS within these regions. And first off, we'll have a presentation from Mr. Joshua Sam, who's the Hazardous Waste Management Advisor at SPREP. SPREP is the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environmental Program that oversees the key environmental projects and initiatives for the region, particularly for the Minamata initial assessments, most of which are ongoing in the region. And most recently, they also have the Jeff Islands Child Project for the Pacific, which stands for the Implementing Sustainable Low and Non-Chemical Development in SIDS, which also involves several activities targeted towards mercury management. Following from that presentation, we will have representing the Caribbean, Ms. Jewel Batchersing, Director of the Basel Convention Regional Center for the Caribbean, or BCRC Caribbean, and Ms. Laura Teixeira, Project Execution Officer at the BCRC Caribbean. And similarly to SPREP, BCRC Caribbean is also a key organization for their region that assists in the implementation of several chemicals and waste management activities for different multilateral environmental agreements, including the Minamata Convention. And over the years, BCRC Caribbean has executed over 10 Minamata initial assessments, a national action plan on artisanal and small-scale gold mining, and they have several other activities on mercury management as well that we'll hear from later today. But first, we'll have a presentation from Mr. Sam, who unfortunately is actually traveling for the pre-COP for the Pacific right now. So we have a recorded presentation from him, which I will hopefully be sharing with you now. 1 second as I get to the next slide. And if anyone has any issues hearing, if I can just ask the panelists to let me know as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, participants. Good morning, good afternoon, participants, ladies and gentlemen, from whichever part of the world you are joining us from. My presentation this afternoon will focus on actions that have been taken in the Pacific with regards to the issue of mercury and some of the trends that we see coming out of these activities that we have been executing in the Pacific. My name is Joshua Sam, and I am with the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. I head our hazardous waste management program that covers our work and service to members regarding the waste and chemicals MEA cluster, including Minamata. My presentation again is focused on Pacific SIDS actions and trends. Firstly, we have been working with BRI since 2019 to execute Minamata initial assessments for a number of our countries, including Cook Islands, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Niue, Palau, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. So far, we have completed and published Vanuatu's MIA. The rest expected to be completed late this year, and Tonga will be completing theirs independently due to contractual arrangements that we have with them. Also, separately from us at SPREP, UNEP and BRI are also implementing the MIA for the Federated States of Micronesia. And I must also add that a number of our countries, including Samoa and Papua New Guinea, have also been working on their MIAs through bilateral projects, either with UNEP in the case of PNG or UNDP in the case of Samoa. We have also been working with BRI to try and assist Pacific Island countries participate in the global Mercury database and monitoring programs. We've had discussions with countries on their willingness to participate, at the same time to help in the collection and analysis of human as well as animal tissues for sampling. So these are some of the activities that we have conducted so far. These two activities have produced preliminary information from which we can confidently work out some trends in the Pacific. Firstly, from the MIAs, we have established a couple of things. Firstly, sources of mercury. Most of you will know that we are one of the least developed regions of the world, so we don't have big industries that are involved in the production of mercury. And so the sources of mercury, which are not surprising, come from mercury-added products such as fluorescent lamps, electrical switches and relays, as well as batteries. A lot of our countries have also shown elevated levels of mercury coming from the preparation, the use and the disposal of dental mercury amalgams. Because our region also lacks a lot of specially engineered landfills, a lot of our countries use open dumping, and this has been found through the MIA process has been a significant source of mercury for the region. And also finally, the combustion of fossil fuels for power generation and transport. Many of our countries are small, and so we rely on thermal power generation from diesel generation. We've also found seafood as a major route of exposure to people because we love eating seafood, and we also have identified habitats that are at great risk. This includes wetlands, mangroves, aquatic habitats that are closer to contaminated sites, and wildlife at great risk, albatross and other birds that are listed on the slide. So in terms of future actions going forward, what we plan to do in a region that is lacking bit of awareness and education on the issue of mercury. We've been fortunate to receive funding support from Jeff through the Jeff Islands Pacific project. We will embark on a major campaign to help raise awareness around issues of mercury. We plan to develop a regional action plan to be approved by our leaders so we can undertake certain strategic action at the regional level. As part of the Jeff Islands project also, we are going to be assisting countries develop mercury legislation to prevent some of these mercury-containing products from entering their borders, as well as dealing with waste that is already present in the country. As part of the project also, we will be helping to clean up and dispose legacy waste of mercury. And finally, we want to also promote the benefits of the Minamata Convention, noting that we only have 7 Minamata parties in the region. So we want to do that also, so we have a few more countries join and benefit from being a party to the convention. Thank you for listening. As I am not there to take questions live, my colleagues from BRI who have been doing bulk of the work for us are available to take any questions from the audience when we do come to panel discussions. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Okay, and we thank Joshua very much for his presentation. And as noted, BRI has also been conducting the Minamata initial assessments. And some of the findings of the inventory conducted so far were also included in David's presentation earlier in terms of the mercury releases. And we're hoping to conduct some more biomonitoring in the next couple of months or so. And now I will hand over to our next presentation on the Caribbean region with Ms. Bachsingh and Mr. Shera. So 1 second as I switch slides. All right, over to you. Thanks.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jewel Bachsingh. I'm the director of the BCRC Caribbean. So thanks very much for the organizers of the Secretariat and of course BRI. Talia, good to see you as always. The presentation will be done by Laura. I just wanted to take you for to say a few words about the work that has been done in the Caribbean region. The Caribbean region is unique, similar to that of the Pacific, and with the island chain, we have a diverse use of mercury. So including mercury-added products, but also looking at artisanal small-scale gold mining in two countries primarily. There is some chloralkali use as well, but the center's work was pivotal, not binding under the work that we're supposed to do, but we opted to facilitate the conduct of Minamata initial assessments, and Laura will tell you the number that we've done. We've done quite a lot. And we also facilitated a national action plan development. The region, despite its small size, there is that use of mercury, and it is imperative that we continue to restrict mercury use globally, but also in our region. Dr. Evers indicated the link with the fishing industry. Of course, we are just like the Pacific that Joshua said, we are also a fishing area as well. So it's important to understand these trends and what is happening with mercury use. Going forward, you'll see that several activities have happened. Antigua and Barbuda, under the auspices of the Minamata Convention, was able to conduct a specific international project. And we continue now with the Jeff Islands program, similar to what is being done in the Pacific, really trying to rule out additional work under the Minamata Convention. For me, it is imperative to state that it is really important to continue to garner funding, whether through the specific international program or other mechanisms, to ensure that the sustainability of the work that we do in mercury is continued, and we don't just stop at this juncture that we're at. I think we're at a critical juncture as we start to look at legislation and low-hanging fruit to reduce mercury-added products in particular. The phase out of mercury in the gold mining sector is happening and will be forced to happen eventually. So with that, I want to pass to Laura, and Laura will take you through the presentation. Unfortunately, I have to leave the meeting because I have another meeting now, but wishing you all success with this, and all the best for COP5 as well. Thank you very much. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Jewel, and thank you, Talia, and all of your team for inviting us to present at this event. So again, my name is Laura Teixeira, Project Execution Officer at the Basel Convention Regional Center for the Caribbean region, or for short, the BCRC Caribbean. And so today in our presentation, we'll just tell you all a little bit about the BCRC Caribbean and the work that we've done under Mercury Management and the Minamata Convention in the Caribbean region. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the awareness raising activities that we have completed and the products that we have developed under some of these projects. And we'll end off on the upcoming activities under the Jeff Islands program that Joshua would have mentioned, as it's a global program, and the activities that we have in the Caribbean region as well. Next slide, please. Right, so about the BCRC Caribbean, we serve 15 contracting members, parties in the Caribbean. So as our name states, the Basel Convention Regional Center, we serve these countries with regards to meeting their obligations under the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions. We are hosted by the government of Trinidad and Tobago through a framework agreement with the BRS Secretariat. And through this engagement and through primarily through the execution of chemical and waste projects within the region is how we encourage our countries to complete the work and sort of meet their obligations under the conventions. And so this is where the Minamata work would have come in, and we have done quite a few mercury management projects within the region over the last couple of years. One thing to note as well is that at the 2023 BRS COPs in May, we were also endorsed by the COPs to become a Stockholm Convention Regional Center as well. So we will have a name change very soon. And although we were conducting work under the Stockholm Convention in relation to POPs anyways in the Caribbean region, we will now officially be a Stockholm Center. Next slide. Right, so on the map that you'll see on the screen there are currently 11 parties to the Minamata Convention in the Caribbean region. And very excitingly, Belize and St. Vincent and the Grenadines are our most recent countries that acceded to the convention this year. So I think it was about a month ago for St. Vincent and the Grenadines and a few months for Belize. So we're very happy and excited that they have acceded to the convention, and we would have worked with them on their Minamata initial assessments as well over the past few years. Next slide. Right, and so this, I know it's quite a few maps that we're showing. So this map shows and highlights the 10 Minamata initial assessment projects that we would have done in the Caribbean region. So not all of these countries are yet party to the Minamata Convention, but through these MIA projects, they are actively considering acceding to the convention, and we're hoping that a few of them will do so in the coming years. To note here as well, through the various MIA projects, we would have also hosted several training workshops, lessons learned workshops, and disseminated knowledge products throughout the Caribbean region. And with these events, we didn't limit it to just the project countries, but we invited all of the Caribbean countries that we serve to have that information sharing throughout the region. Right. On this slide, I will just touch very briefly on some of the results from the 10 MIA projects that we did and their mercury release inventories, even though I know these countries were also included in Dave's slides earlier in this meeting. So we have here on the screen, you'll see that, of course, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica had the highest levels of mercury emissions. And as Dave would have mentioned, for Trinidad and Tobago, it would have been with regards to their oil and gas industry, the extraction and use of fuels. And with Jamaica, their alumina production from bauxite is where the major source of mercury releases would have been, mercury emissions would have been identified. For some of the other countries, although they had very low levels of mercury emissions in comparison to these two bigger countries, their major sources of releases and emissions were from consumer products, mercury added products such as batteries and CFL light bulbs, as well as through other intentional product uses such as dental amalgam, and then waste deposition and wastewater treatment as well. I will highlight here that I know Guyana was one of the major countries as well who had a higher level of mercury emissions from the ASGM sector, but we didn't work on their MIA project, so I didn't include those results here. Next slide, please. Right, so to go into a little bit more depth with Guyana, so following these MIA projects that we did, we also then went into developing a national action plan for artisanal and small-scale gold mining for the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And so this project was co-executed by the BCRC Caribbean and the Ministry of Natural Resources in Guyana. And the National Action Plan was actually finalized and approved at the cabinet level and submitted to the Secretariat in 2022. And on the screen there, you'll see the overall strategies and areas of identification for inclusion in the NAP that were found following the baseline assessments, following the stakeholder engagement and consultations. And some of these strategies included, of course, the reduction of the use of mercury and elimination of the worst practices that were identified, especially in the artisanal artisanal mining practices. They also took a look at the legislation and provided recommendations for formalization and regulation and in the inclusion of the definition of the small scale and artisanal mining in their framework. The strategies also recommend developing appropriate financial and market-based incentives. So really looking at increasing miners' access to finance to support this transition to mercury-free technologies and building their resilience. Then it looked at the mercury trade within the country, where the importation of mercury comes in and how the mercury is tracked through their internal trade. Then looking at the public health strategies and improving the health system in order to identify and manage mercury poisoning within the health centers that are located within the different mining areas. Then, of course, looking at the consideration for vulnerable groups, because in many areas in Guyana, some mining occurs with near indigenous lands and indigenous communities. So the involvement of these vulnerable groups, as well as women and children, was a very important part of developing the National Action Plan to ensure that they were aware of the work that was being done on the ground and aware of the strategies that are being recommended in the NAP. And then, of course, the awareness raising and outreach, developing products, infographics, videos to share and disseminate with not only stakeholders, but mining communities, mining organizations, and so forth. Right, so the next slide will just show a few photos following the fieldwork that was done with the consultants that were engaged to do the assessment and develop the strategies following those assessments. And one thing to note here as well was that this project was done, the majority of this project was done during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was a bit challenging as there were other restrictions that had to be considered with regards to planning of the fieldwork and moving through the different areas that were targeted for the assessment. But we were able to complete it, and the photos on the screen, you'll see some of the different areas. You'll see the consultants with their engagement, as well as just a few other aerial shots as well. Next slide. Right, so some other Mercury initiatives in the region. So don't know if you noticed, this is, we did some fish sampling. This was a project that was done under, funded by the government of Switzerland, but in collaboration as well with Biodiversity Research Institute. And so this project included countries such as Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. And Dave would have presented some of the related results regarding this. And then for the hair sampling picture that you see on the screen, this was a project that was done with it was entitled Global IPEN Mercury Threat to Women and Children Across 3 Oceans. So some of the countries that participated in this project were Barbados, the Dominican Republic, Grenada, Haiti, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago. And it was where some hair samples were taken from women across these countries and tested for their levels of mercury. Another project that we would have done is the identifying feasible strategies for the environmentally sound disposal of spent lighting products in the Caribbean region. This project was done with St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. And it really took a look at what the national situation is with regards to their spent lighting products and providing recommendations towards the environmentally sound disposal. And then we also did quite a few training workshops and lessons learned workshops that we did virtually, as these were also done during the COVID-19 pandemic. But it then allowed us to open up these these presentations and these sessions to the wider Caribbean region for anyone to join and participate in. Right. So now to move on to some of the awareness raising activities that we did. So we did quite a few. We did some live action videos that we didn't include in the presentation given the time, but these were specific to 5 of the countries that we worked on their MIAs with. But they're available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to take a look at those. And then we also developed quite a few animated infographics, flyers, posters, videos. And these really looked at some of the major issues that were identified following the MIA projects and trying to work a way to disseminate the information, break it down into a digestible format, and really reach our audience, our general audience, to highlight the different areas that we have identified. So these are also available if you would like to see any of the products that we've developed. We're always willing to share. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll also see that we developed some characters. We also have a Stop the Pops campaign that is focused on persistent organic pollutants. And what we try to do is tie in some of the characters from that campaign into some of our mercury awareness products so that we can develop and create sort of a general chemicals and waste communications campaign. So coming out of that, we also had the creation of our champion, Captain Minamata, who with a lot of his, well, a lot of the products that use him, he sort of takes the Caribbean region through a journey on how we can protect ourselves, our families, our friends, on protecting ourselves from mercury. Next slide. Right. So just a few other products that were developed. These were done under the National Action Plan for Guyana. And these products really zero in on the ASGM sector and using mercury in that sector. And we also developed, so we have quite a few infographics. We have 2 animated videos that were developed. And we also translated some of this material into Spanish and Portuguese based on the situation in Guyana, where they may have some miners who have come across from either Venezuela or Brazil, so that we can ensure that the awareness is raised, not just to those that speak English, but to those that also speak Spanish and Portuguese. And then our next slide is a little video that we would have done on a Mercury-Free Caribbean campaign. Thanks for that. So this logo was recently developed in the event that we have developed so many products and materials under these projects throughout the years. So we wanted to really tie them together, and also we know that we will be continuing to add to this campaign. We decided to develop for a Mercury-Free Caribbean logo to just bring the campaign together. All right. And so the last portion of my presentation will just touch a little bit about the Jeff Islands program and what we have upcoming in the region with regards to mercury management initiatives. And so as Joshua would have mentioned from the Pacific, the islands stands for implementing sustainable low and non-chemical development in small island developing states. It is a global program, Jeff funded program. It exists in the Caribbean, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean as well. And the implementing agencies for the Caribbean child projects are UNEP, FAO, and IDB. And then we will be executing the Caribbean child projects as well. So on the screen, you'll see there are 2 project countries that are UNEP implemented. But we are taking a synergized approach to execute the activities as the activities are more or less in alignment, but it was just that there were 9 countries at first, and then we added 3 countries following that. And then there is an IDB implemented portion child project. Those are the ones in orange that have some different activities for those project countries. And so what this islands program is looking at, we have quite a few activities. I won't go into all of them in the interest of time, but we really are looking at the management of end-of-life vehicles, e-waste in the Caribbean region, plastic waste as it relates to the cruise ship industry, as well as PVC waste in a few of the project countries. We are looking at green procurement, so looking at alternatives to mercury added products that can be encouraged, as well as looking at labeling practices and GHS. And then, of course, looking at our legislative framework in the Caribbean region and the environmentally sound management of mercury, as well as POPs. So my last slide would just have a few of the mercury-specific activities. Yes, thank you. So just to touch on these a bit, some of the mercury-specific related activities under the Jeff Islands program includes developing training programs for border control agencies. So possibly on the use of the handheld XRF devices to identify mercury and mercury added products. And we have some pilot projects that are planned for 2 of the countries, the project countries. Then we're looking at working with CARICOM and COTED to amend HS codes to improve the identification of mercury-added products at the border control at the import level. And then we're looking at sustainable management practices, or sustainable procurement, sorry. And this activity will look at what suitable alternatives can be encouraged in the Caribbean region. And we have pilot projects also planned for this one with regards to supporting the phase out of mercury-added products and encouraging the use of alternatives. And then we also have an activity that will be looking at the environmentally sound management of stockpiles that may exist in some of our project countries, whether it be, some countries have recently done a switch from fluorescent lighting in their countries to the LED light bulbs, and they have stockpiles that are within the country waiting for disposal. And so we will be developing strategies with regards to this, and we will actually be doing a disposal initiative towards the end of the project to get rid of some of these high priority stockpiles that are found within the region. Right. So I think that is more or less it for me, but we have our contact information there. If there's any questions following this event, we're always willing to answer those questions or share any information that we have. Thank you, Talia.
Right, thank you so much, Laura and Jewel as well for their presentation. It was very informative and provided a lot of great resources that you can find on BCRC Caribbean's website. That's there as well. And we also just want to highlight as well that as Laura talked about the activities under the Jeff Islands program for the Caribbean, a lot of those activities will also be similarly carried out in the Pacific region as well. And also in terms of the hair sampling project that was conducted looking at hair in the Caribbean, it was also done for the Pacific as well. So that's available on IPEN's website also. So I will just open up to if we have any questions on the chat. I'm not able to see the chat right now, but if there are any questions, please, I would ask the panelists to let me know, or you can also respond directly in the chat box as well. And I'd also encourage everyone to please visit the www.sprep website, sprep.org, briwildlife.org, bcrc-caribbean.org, and of course the Minamata Convention on Mercury.org as well. To gain more information on the discussions that we had today and a lot of the resources like the Minamata initial assessment reports. For the Pacific, they will be made available hopefully by the end of the year as well. So with that, I'll pass over to Grace if you have any closing comments as well, or anyone else as well, any of our panelists also if you have any further comments before we close. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you again for everyone attending, and especially if it's very difficult in your time zone. And again, the meeting is recorded and all the presentations plus the video will be online, posted on the Minamata website, online webpage. So thank you again, and we look forward to our further engagement through the various projects that have been mentioned today. So good day, good evening, good morning to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And once again, thank you for all the great presentations and engagement. And for all the participants, we will highly appreciate if you can fill in the little survey that we're going to pop up on your device after you quit the webinar. And all of you are more than welcome to join our following online events to help us together make Mercury history. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.